This video will cover notes on factoring trinomials by the AC method. So we've been factoring mostly binomials, like with the difference of squares. So now we're going to look at trinomials, which is 3 terms, and we're going to learn a method which is called the AC method for factoring them. All right, now remember, factoring is the opposite of multiplying polynomials, which we did in the last unit. So just a recap on multiplying polynomials, we have x plus 2 times x minus 5. So I just want to show you, like going forward, what that looks like, and then what we're doing with factoring is going backwards. So going forward, remember, we would double distribute, so x times x is x squared, x times negative 5 is negative 5x, then 2 times x is plus 2x, then 2 times negative 5 is negative 10. All right, then from there we would look and we see in the middle we have 2 like terms, so we would have to add those 2 like terms together, and that would make negative 3x. Okay, so with multiplying, my end result was this, and you can see that's a trinomial that has 3 terms in my answer. So now what we're doing with factoring is we're taking this trinomial, and we want to know what it looks like factored, which means go back to that x plus 2 times x minus 5. All right, so we're going to go through the steps for doing that. And notice here we have a middle step. All right, we have the middle step, and the only thing different from the last step and the middle step is this negative 3x term got split into negative 5x plus 2x. And it also, you can notice that in the factored form, we have those 2 numbers, negative 5 and 2. Okay, so the whole goal here is how are we going to split up this negative 3x into these 2 numbers? How do I split that up? Okay, so first we're going to write our trinomial. All we're focusing on today are trinomials. So the first thing we want to do is write our trinomial in standard form. And this has a special form because we're going to be looking a lot at trinomials. So standard form for a trinomial looks like this: ax squared. So the x squared term would come first, and the a is just the coefficient, the number in front of it, plus bx, so x with the exponent of 1 comes next. Its coefficient we're going to call b, and then plus c with no variable at all. So that's something that you're going to need to memorize, is the standard form for a trinomial. All right, so now all we're going to do in example 1 is look at 2 trinomials and put them in standard form and determine a, b, and c. So looking at part A, that is not in standard form because we're not in descending powers. So the 7m squared needs to come first, then plus 3m, and then minus 5. So now you can see the a, b, and c. A is with the m squared, so that's 7. B is with the m, so that's plus 3. And c is with the last thing with no m, so that would be negative 5. Okay? Now for part B, it's a little bit more tricky just because we have 2 variables now, but it works in the same way. We want x squared first, then the x, then no x. So if we look here, 5x squared would come first, then a single x would be with the 18xy, and then no x would be the 6y squared. So the a would be 5, then 18, and then 6. So that's very easy, but you have to know that skill in order to know how to factor a trinomial. So just like everything with factoring, we have a list of steps for how to factor a trinomial in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so as we go through our first example, or actually this I guess would be example 2, we'll go through the steps as we do the first one. Okay, so the first example is x squared plus 9x plus 20. All right, so actually before you even get started, I would say a preliminary step is to identify a, b, and c after it's in standard form. So for this first example, we are already in standard form. So we want to go ahead and identify A, B, and C. And when you get really good at this, you can just identify these in your head. You don't have to write them down. But for the notes and for right now, I want you to write them down. Now, A is the number in front of the x squared, which there is no number there, so remember that is 1. These are always going to have numbers. Then B is 9, and then C is 20. Okay, so now for how to factor. So if you look at step 1, it says to multiply A times C. This is why this is called the AC method. So remember at the very top of the notes, we were calling factoring by the AC method. That's why it's called that, because we're going to multiply by A times C. So looking down in our problem, our A times C is equal to 1 times 20, which is 20. Okay? So then the second step. The second step is to systematically list all possible pairs of factors. We're factoring, right? So we're going to factor that A times C number, which in our problem right now is 20, until you find the one that adds up to B. Okay, we'll talk about what that second step means in just a second. So first of all, we're going to find the factors of A times C. So our A times C here is 20, so we're going to find all factors of 20. We're going to start, I like to start with 1 and then go up. So 1 and 20, then 2 and 10. You want to put them together as pairs. So that's why I'm doing this in a T-chart. 3 does not go into 20. Then you have 4 and 5, and that's it. Okay, so those are my factors of 20. Now, you want to look at these as pairs. So my second part of that step 2 says, until you find the one that adds up to B. So that's where the B comes in. We had the A times C, now the B comes in. So the B for this problem is 9. So looking at these pairs, you want to see which one of these add to 9. So they multiply to get 20, but which ones add to 9? 1 plus 20 is 21. That does not work. 2 plus 10 is 12. That doesn't work. But 4 plus 5 equals 9. That works. That's what we want. Okay, so the whole goal in factoring is finding two numbers that add to get that B term and multiply to get the A times C term. And you can see that from the very, very first example. You see how I had -5 and +2. -5 plus 2 is -3. That's the B. -5 times 2 is -10, which would be the A, since the A is 1, times C. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. Now, if you also look, if I start here, sorry, I'm having a lot of colors here, so let me just kind of erase this. Okay, if you start here and we're moving backwards, looking at this middle term, all right, so if you look, the x squared stays x squared. The -10 stays -10. But looking at the middle term, that B term, that gets split into the two numbers that I find. So that is the next step. Step 3. Split the middle term, that's the B term, of the trinomial using that pair of factors as coefficients. Okay, so if you look at what I have in black, x squared plus 9x plus 20, that 9x is going to get split. So the first x squared, so I'm going to rewrite what I have in black. X squared stays x squared. Plus 20 stays plus 20. But that 9x gets split using the 4 and the 5 as coefficients. So 4x plus 5x equals 9x. So that's that middle step in working backwards. Now, once you've done that, the last step is to factor by grouping, because now we have 4 terms, and that's how we factor by grouping, is with 4 terms. So just a reminder of how to factor by grouping. My first pair, you look for the GCF, that's x. Factor that out and you get x plus 4. My second pair, the GCF is 5. Factor that out and you also get x plus 4. Reminder with grouping, you want those two to be the same. So then you have factors of x plus 4 times x plus 5, and that is your answer. Okay, so we just factored that trinomial into 2 factors of binomials. Now, you can always check. I'm only going to check for the first one just to show you how. So if you're unsure of your answer, you can check to see if you're right. And you can check by just doing what we did in the last unit, is the double distributing. X squared times 5x, or plus 5x, plus 4x, plus 20. Combine like terms, you get x squared plus 9x plus 20, and that's the exact thing that we started with at the top, so that was the correct answer. Okay, so remember what I have boxed here, that's my factored polynomial. That's what I'm looking for when I factor. Okay, so we're going to look at a variety, the same process, but a little slightly different problems here. So part B, we're wanting to factor this. The first thing we have to make sure is that we're in standard form. So we need to rewrite and say that's x squared plus x minus 12. Okay, then from there we can find A, B, and C. So if your answer is not, or if your starting trinomial is not in standard form, then your A, B, and C could be wrong. So A is what's in front of x squared, that'd be 1. B is in front of x, that would also be 1. And then C, notice you have a negative 12. Okay, so that is A, B, and C. So the first step to factoring by the AC method is multiplying A times C, which would be 1 times negative 12 is negative 12. The second step is to factor that negative 12. Now, when you're looking for factors of a negative, that negative means that when I'm factoring, like let's say 12 is 2 times 6, right? 2 times 6 is positive 12, but to get a negative 12, either the 2 or the 6 can be negative. Only one though. So you have to figure out which one is going to be negative. But for now, I'm going to factor 12 as if it were positive. So I'm going to do that first. So just pretend that 12 is positive and just find the factors for now, the numbers. So that's 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. Now, those pairs that go together, remember we're adding to figure out how to get to the B, which in this case is 1. But if I'm adding these numbers, what I'm really wanting to do is I'm adding, and one of them has to be negative in order to multiply to get a negative. Okay, so really when I have a negative, I kind of think of it as subtraction. Okay, I think of it as subtraction. So instead of adding, if you have a negative A times C. So when I subtract, you could either subtract the first one minus the second one, or vice versa. So think about this for a second. If I took 1 minus 12, that means the 12 would be negative, then you get a negative 11. But then if I did 12 minus 1, you get, hold on, sorry, you get a positive 11. Okay? Now remember, the number that I'm looking for here at the end is 1. Okay? Negative 11, positive 11, neither of those work. So then I go to my next set, 2 and 6. 2 minus 6 is negative 4. Then 6 minus 2 is positive 4. Neither of those work. So I'm looking for 1. So then finally I have 3 minus 4 is negative 1. There's 1. But to get my answer that I really want, which is positive 1, you have a 4 minus 3. Okay, so what that means is 4 minus 3, or you can think of it as a negative 3 plus 4, gets 1, and negative 3 times 4 makes negative 12. So those are the two numbers I'm looking for. So when you have a negative there on the end, you have to be very careful about which one is going to be negative and which one's going to be positive. Okay, we'll get more practice with that in class too, because I know that can be confusing. All right, so now those are the two numbers that I'm going to split that middle term into. So when I split that, the first term, x squared, stays the same. The last term, minus 12, stays the same, but that plus x splits up into the two numbers I found, negative 3x plus 4x. Now, all you have to do is factor by grouping. So the first group, take out an x, and you get x minus 3. The second group, take out a 4, and you get x minus 3 as well. So my final factored answer would be x minus 3 times x plus 4. And that's my answer. Okay? Now again, you could always check your answer just to make sure that you got that right. But we're going to move on. Okay. All right, so just going through the steps again. First thing, is it in standard form? Yes, it is. So now we want to find A, B, and C. So A is 8, it's the first. B is 14, C is 3. Just go A, B, C. So then my first step is to multiply A times C, which would be 8 times 3, which is 24. So then I want to factor 24. 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. So then out of those factors, we want to find out which one of those add. There's no negatives going on in this problem, so that's good. I want to see which one of those add to get b, which is 14. 1 plus 24? No. 2 plus 12? That works, but you want to make sure everything else is okay too. 3 plus 8 is 11? No. 4 plus 6 is 10? No. So 2 plus 12, that is the one that I want. Okay, so now we have 8x squared stays the same. The plus 3 at the end stays the same, but then that 14x, that's how we split that into 2 plus 12. So that would be plus 2x plus 12x. So now, factor by grouping. My first pair, I have a common factor of 2 and x. When I divide by that, you're left with 4x plus 1. And in the last one, I have a common factor of 3, and then you also get 4x plus 1. So my final answer is 4x plus 1 times 2x plus 3. We're going to do one more example with practicing with the negative. Okay, so negatives can be kind of tricky, so that's why we're going to do another example with the negative. Last example. So first of all, standard form. It is not in standard form. So 6x squared is first, but then minus 7x would come next, then plus 2. So a is 6, b is negative 7, c is 2. So then a times c is 6 times 2, which is 12. And factor 12. So we have 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. Now notice I wanted a negative, but if you look at our 12 is positive. But the negative comes in when we have the b. The b is negative 7. So what that means is, remember, I want to multiply to get the a times c, but I want to add to get b, but b is negative. So how do I add to make a negative number, but multiply to get a positive number? That means both factors have to be negative, because a negative times a negative is a positive, but if you add two negatives together, that means it's only more negative. So that means that both factors have to be negative. So let's see, if I have a negative 1 and a negative 12, and you're like adding those together, so like negative 1 plus negative 12, is really negative 1 minus 12, that gives you negative 13. When I'm looking for negative 7, so no. Negative 2 and negative 6, that makes negative 8, no. Negative 3 and negative 4, that does make negative 7, so those are the numbers that I'm looking for. So they both have to be negative. Again, negative 3 times negative 4 is positive 12, but negative 3 plus negative 4 makes negative 7, which is what I want. So now let's factor. So we have 6x squared. That negative 7x splits into negative 3x and negative 4x, and then plus 2. So factor by grouping, and what's in common with 6x squared and 3x is 3x. What's left over is 2x minus 1. Now, in the second grouping, remember, I have a negative here. You've got to watch out for that. So since the negative's in the front, that negative's going to have to come out, as well as a 2. So when I factor out a negative 2, you get 2x. Be careful here. You have a positive dividing by a negative, so it will be minus 1. These are the same, so then my final answer is 2x minus 1 times 3x minus 2, and that is my final answer. So that is factoring by the AC method.